that when that moment comes, enough people have been educated, or not just educated, but made aware of what those key aspects of the Armed Forces Pension Scheme are. So when the big decisions have to be taken, they go, yeah, this is not something we play fast and loose with. This is the reason for it. And the acme of staff skill is when you hear people quoting that back to you. And when they're quoting that back to you, you go, job done.
Welcome back to Veterans in Politics podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Ball, and I've served on the front line of military operations, as well as a very different front line of UK politics. This week, our guest is Major General Neil Marshall, who looks after the Forces Pension Society. Now, why is it important to speak to people like Neil? First of all, this informative conversation covers off a lot about pensions within the armed forces community. But for me, what was really interesting to get from Neil was how he engages with government. Call it lobbying, call it influencing, call it campaigning. What Neil likes to call it is definitely influence work. Now, you'll find this across the veterans community, how we need to get our issues up close and personal with policymakers. And from this conversation with Neil, you'll get some really good top tips about how you can get what you think is important, what you need to get in front of policymakers by using the example of Neil's work. This is such an informative value-add chat, and it's just another dimension of where veterans are showing up in politics. Now, if this is your first time here, a very warm welcome. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really helps shows like ours grow. And if you are able to support us, you can see in the links various details, including the Forces Pension Society and other ways in which you can support this show. But now let's go to Forces Pension Society HQ, where I sat down with Neil. This is a podcast first. We are at the Forces Pension Society HQ here in London, and it's actually a first interview with a general. So today I'm with Major General Neil Marshall. Now, I should say, you don't have the word retired as officers as generals, because generals never retire. Is that right?
That seems to be the case. They just fade away. But yeah, for the purposes of my current role, I do sort of try and make sure that's part of the whole package.
Yeah, and it's really useful. I mean, the amount of generals that give back and work within the third sector or across industry as well, it is of huge benefit, because not only is your experience, but when people understand what a general is and how that can open doors and open conversations. Of course, that's what we're here to talk about today. We're at a key moment for the Forces Pension Society at the moment. Do you want to explain a little bit, Neil, about the background to why we've decided to meet up today and what's happening with the Forces Pension Society today?
Yeah, well, for those who don't know about us, the Forces Pension Society is an independent, we're a not-for-profit organisation, and we're funded by our membership subscriptions, and therefore we're not part of the Ministry of Defence. We've been around for 80 years. We're celebrating our 80th anniversary this year.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. We seem to be doing all right on it. And we had our 80th event at the Tower of London recently as well. So we're very proud of our history. But fundamentally, the Society was formed in 1946 at the end of the Second World War, as the welfare state was being formed, demobilisation, a big change in society, and what was then the Officers Pension Society was formed just to make sure that veterans' voices were heard in relation to pension provision, etc., and a dignified retirement. And over the years, the organisation has evolved. Through options for change and all that, and then pension schemes being introduced and change and evolving. And now we are over 60,000 strong in terms of our membership, and our whole purpose is to support our members, to enhance pension clarity for our members, and to influence policy now and for future generations. And it's that whole sort of future generations piece which is really important in the context of helping sustain defence capability through part of that pension provision.
Yeah, and the whole moral component of warfare. And you mentioned Veterans' Voices. We're definitely going to pick up on how you personally do that and how the Forces Pension Society does that by working with policymakers and government. We'll definitely pick up on that in this interview. But before we get there, we'd like to take our guests back to the start and their own military careers, because that's what connects us.
Yes.
albeit I was a staff sergeant. I'm very proud of that. And you left as a Major General. And you joined in the early 80s, just after the Falklands conflict. Was the Falklands conflict and those personalities around there, were they big? Did that have a big part to play in your own decision to join?
Oh, absolutely. So I was 16, 17 at that time, and you saw what was happening out there, and there was just such a big event in your life. And I remember just seeing the Brian Hanrahan counted them all out, counted them all back. All this. So this was the first sort of conflict that was played out in the media.
So he was an embedded journalist in the Falklands campaign.
That's right. Yeah, and seeing things like that, and all the other commentary that went on, just struck me as, wow, this is something special, and not just as an event, but also the people who were involved. Hugely impressive. Prowess being displayed, and dare I say it, the very best of British. And I thought, I want to be part of an organisation like that. And interestingly, when I left school and went to do my gap year, I ended up down in the Falkland Islands for 6 months. But
you're kidding?
No. I did a bit of sheep farming. It was all part of it. It just sort of happened. One thing leads to another type thing. And I spent 6 months down there, sheep farming, subsistence farming, as part of my sort of year. But from leaving school and joining the army, and a few other bits and pieces as well. Okay. So definitely an important sort of waypoint.
Well, you could have done that in the Romney Marsh in Kent or somewhere like that, but no, the Falklands it was.
Yeah, up in the Highlands of Scotland.
Well, so joining in the 80s, those personalities that had served in the Falklands, they must have been around when you turned up to your first unit or going through training. Yeah. Was that quite evident in the personalities you saw?
Yes and no. So when I went through Sandhurst in 1985, I joined the Royal Artillery, and I went to 3-9 Regiment in Germany in Sennlager in 86, and that was very much Cold War. So that was the sort of that was the main effort. That's where the focus of the military was at, and I was introduced to a whole sort of completely different lifestyle out there, which was incredibly professional, very focused, but also you spent all your time out there. You lived and breathed your general deployment plan. You knew what was expected of you, and I was also able to pursue my sporting career. I was a Langlauf skier, Nordic skier, and the regiment was true to its word in delivering that for me. And I captained the regiment's Nordic ski team for a few years, and then went on and pursued that aspect of it. So all-consuming type effort, and it was just brilliant those first few years.
What a brilliant lifestyle for a young person. I think someone described to me once that Germany was the soul of the British Army.
Yeah.
It was a great social, of course, apart from that rush back home as they did, but you were pretty much there a lot of the time. Absolutely. And many people married local people as well.
Yeah, the 3-9 Regiment had been there for decades. And so it was very much embedded in the local community. And so when it eventually left Germany, it was quite a wrench for the organisation. But that was all part of that learning experience. And so tail end of the Cold War, then into sort of the Balkans era, if I could call it that. Service with 5 Airborne Brigade as well in the mid-90s. And it was during that time that, of course, some of the Falklands veterans were more of a reference point then. And that ethos and that spirit was still very much part of the whole sort of DNA.
Particularly in the brigade, 5 Airborne Brigade.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, omnipresent. Those. In fact, the first ever veteran I met was my school caretaker, Mr. Webb. I wonder if he's still alive. But growing up in the 80s, he was a gentle giant of a man, and it was the reason I joined, I think, as well as my grandfather's service. But knowing that those personalities, I remember the Falklands. I was 3 when the Falklands happened. Yeah. That ages me. There you go. But it was very felt. The whole culture of the British Army was inspired by that moment in our history.
Yes, very, very much so. Very much so. And we've grown since then as well.
Yeah. Well, history since your service is a story of recent service of the British Army, ranging from post-Falklands, Cold War, the Balkans and Afghanistan. Now, it's no surprise that I'd like to talk about Afghanistan from my own service and also as co-founder of the Afghanistan veterans community. But you did some really punchy roles. I mean, and they also encountered other roles I think it was around about the London Olympics time. You were involved in that, Army HQ. But you also dealt with really tricky issues like the petrol tanker strike as well.
Yes. Operation Escalon, I remember it correctly.
Well, tell us about that. Well, why does the military get called into these things?
One area you just forgot to mention, of course, is Iraq as well. So there's post 9/11, there's Afghanistan, there's Iraq, and all of that, and the way things played out over the next decade or so. And in various roles, I found myself working with American colleagues a fair bit. So in Baghdad in 2004, then again back in Kabul about 8-9 years later, and a bit of time in the Ministry of Defence when I was working with the Operations Directorate with the Afghanistan Commitments Team. So very formative years during that period as well. And then when I was Assistant Chief of Operations in the Army's headquarters in Andover, it's 2010 to 2012. That was during the time of Operation Escalon, the fuel tanker driver strike. I also had some planning experience from Op Fresco Zulu back in 2002-03 when the firemen went on strike when I was a Lieutenant Colonel in the Commitments Division in the then Headquarters Land Forces. But these things all required you to take some of those skills that you had developed during your formative years to sort of liaise, coordinate, so gently influence, but making sure that you are able to get the military's point of view across, get those requirements set, and then understand the nature of the problem that you were facing and where we could plug in, and also some of the let's be honest, some of the vested interests that were at play, whether that was within government or within other organisations. But it was all about just understanding the environment, taking time to immerse yourself in that, and spending time with other people who you may not have necessarily collaborated with before to understand their perspective.
And also, it's an opportunity for the public to understand our perspective in the service.
Yeah.
Because I was reminded of this during COVID-19, tipping up to my local Tesco's for a lateral flow test and seeing the Royal Anglians there and performing, as you would imagine, really professionally. Yes. They had great chat about them, great banter when we're all feeling terrified of the world. Yeah. And I remember, I think I took to Twitter, and their commanding officer at the time was very vocal on Twitter, and I sent him a DM letting him know how professional his troops had been, because I think it's really important. And for much of the British public, it's the only time they encounter the armed forces, because there's so few of us.
And it was similar during the Olympics, it's similar during floods and all that sort of stuff. They see, they get a lot of reassurance that the military are there, should it be necessary. During the Olympics, it was the same, but there are other sort of agencies that should be in the lead on these things, and where the military fill a gap, they should do so for a prescribed period of time before then what is business as usual then is adopted. So the system shouldn't rely on the military for these things, but it's there just in case. And it's very often the planning skills, and I think you saw this during COVID and other national emergencies, where the military ability to plan, coordinate, command and control, fuse together disparate organisations, not necessarily be in charge at the time, but play a very supporting role, really comes out, and it works, and it does allow the public to look in the military in a sort of in a very positive light, and they're not distant.
And of course, through the lens of hindsight, we're talking very positively about that. Yeah. But you as a commander, as a leader, have got to motivate those troops from perhaps switching from war fighting in Iraq, Afghanistan, or the bulk peace support operations, to actually, sorry guys, we're now about to go and man some tankers. We're about to go and man an agricultural and fulfilling the gap of society. Yeah. How did you motivate those people to do that? I think
it very much depends upon if you're in the staff or if you're in a command role. So you're in the staff, it's a functional thing. You're looking at the problem set, you're allocating resources and time, and you're putting together the sort of the architecture that will make this happen. When you're in the command, where the rubber really does hit the road, it's making sure that you practice the delegation down to the lowest level. People say delegate to the point of discomfort and then do so again. That's how these things work. The troops inevitably rise to the occasion. They find novel solutions to complex problems. Very often they're ones that we, the leaders, didn't see, and that's the beauty of it all, is about the trust, the empowerment, and the holding to account that's necessary to do that. And very often we find ourselves doing that brilliantly on operations, and then find it quite difficult to practice in the peacetime environment, which can be quite frustrating. And I think you see some of that playing out in various things that are going on today.
I think you're right. Operations gives you that freedom. I certainly felt it myself. I felt far freer, provided I didn't go off piste and I stayed within boundaries, and remembered that there was a governance, a command structure in place, because that's there to protect us all. But actually it gave me the freedom to operate. And I think you're right. We often forget that when you then come back home. And I think that has an impact on individuals' morale if they don't feel free to express themselves and their potential. So the leadership frameworks are really important.
And all of these are skills that people develop that can then be applied in their second career. Because almost inevitably military people will have a second career because their careers are shorter, as we are both examples of that. And therefore, how do you thrive in life two, as I call it? Well, look back to all those things that you did during your service. Look back to where you were at your happiest and your best, and where you really knew you were performing well. And what was it that you were doing then that you can then take forward into this your second career? And that's for the day job in the Forces Pension Society. So much of our effort is about supporting people through transitions. So they are doing fantastic work. They are so focused on the mission. That's great. But every so often they need just to zoom out, understand where I'm at. Do I need to make a life choice? If so, who can support me? And this is why organisations like ours exist. So everything is linked. It's all linked.
Well, let's come on to that. The kind of help and advice that the Forces Pension Society gives to individuals. What's the kind of things that people might not be aware of about what they might be able to access, what they should be doing in service before they leave? What are the common things that you've encountered in your work?
It's a really good thing to discuss and use this opportunity to do so. For those who are in service, I would say the fundamental purpose of the Armed Forces Pension Scheme, right? Okay, which does take a sizable chunk from the defence budget. There are 470,000 pensions in payment. There are 255,000 pensions being earned, right, by those who are serving, and some of those are dual pensions, 0, 5 and 15 and all that sort of stuff. And there's 490,000 deferred pensions for people who have served and have yet to get their deferred pension. So it's a big enterprise. And the fundamental purpose of the pension is to sustain operational capability. It's the financial wrap that goes around people to do 4 essential things. Incentivise service, so retention. Provide the vital assurance that should the worst happen, that families and individuals be protected through death and health retirement benefits. It provides a platform for a second career, because military careers are shorter than their civilian contemporaries, and set the conditions for a dignified retirement. And why do I say dignified retirement? Well, that's all part of the broader covenant. It's that bond between society, those who govern, and those who serve. And this pension is part of that wrap. And therefore, people who are serving, I think the fundamental thing you need to understand is just understand what you are worth. And people talk about, people are our most important asset and all this sort of stuff. But actually understand what you're worth monetarily. Take a bit of time to find out what you are worth, and we can help in that space. I'm at the 10, 11, 12-year point, whatever it might be. I need to go to the 20-year point before I get an early departure payment. I'm thinking of leaving. Okay, so will you leave at the 14-year, the 15-year point? And if you are going to leave at that point, what would you need to earn in order to receive the same level of benefits from the 20-year point onwards when you become an early departure payment, which then itself leads to a pension at state pension age further down the line. So understand what you are worth. And then you can make an informed choice. Should I stay? Should I go? And it's a conversation amongst the family when you've got a better level of knowledge, and we can help lay that out for people. So there's that sort of retention. Should I stay? Should I go? Then there's the complicating factors of life. All right, medical discharge, pension sharing order on divorce, tax. It's always there, and rules change, and the government shift the goalposts because that's what they do. They're entitled so to do, and policies will ebb and flow. And we will always challenge that and represent the armed forces community. We're not a union, but we are a representative body. And I, peddle those lines very hard with ministers and others, that what we don't want to be witnessing is some sort of change of rules at half time. Now that we're into the World Cup, that's probably a good time to use a football analogy. Don't change the rules at half time and then have people serving thinking, hang on a minute, those aren't the rules that I joined. That's not the deal that I had when I joined. So this is all about trust and making sure that the pension scheme is embedded in that. So people are quite rightly thinking it from an individual perspective. What am I worth? So what for me? What does this mean for my benefits? But also, I would encourage people to think about the broader aspects of this. How do we play it forward for the next generation? If we really want to have a financial wrap that provides those four aspects for people and for the nation, then let's make sure that we're thinking about the next 5, 10, 15 years, as well as the here and now.
On that future generation, I was on the way here on the tube. I saw a poster for recruitment. Yeah. It was actually quite a good one, using the football analogy actually. Yeah. It had a split screen of two female footballers. Yeah. One was on the floor getting tackled in a sports kit. The other one was half in sports kit and half in military kit. And the message was, you can be in our team. Yes. It was another form of competitive team environments that you can do both in sport, and obviously you were a keen sportsman in service. Yes. And that was one of the best recruitment tools back in the 80s. We all remember those adverts with Frank, skiing and
where's Frank?
Yeah, where's Frank? Yeah. Perhaps you were Frank.
Yeah.
But in terms of the pension debate, because pensions are a difficult, often unsexy language to sell to people. Yeah. How do we wrap in the language into the recruitment cell? I mean, one of the things that you just spoke about there is almost around freedoms that it gives you and that wraparound. How do we pitch this to younger people as a way of incentivising them to join the armed forces?
What I would say, Johnny, is that younger people are far more engaged on this now than you and I probably were. You know, I can remember being offered a regular commission in the Royal Artillery and thought, that sounds good, what is it? You know, and it was a career to 55, and I didn't really know that then. I didn't really know the implications of that, but it was an incredible offer, and the rest is history, so to speak. But this sort of whole aspect of getting young people more engaged, actually they are already more engaged, and they are thinking longer term now. Now we, on our roadshows, we now present to audiences at a far earlier stage in careers, because the services are realising this and asking for that information.
What kind of questions are they asking at those roadshows?
They are basically asking, am I saving enough? Can I do added pension, for example, which you can with the Armed Forces Pension Scheme 15? Is this going to be enough to sustain me in my retirement, etc.? But it's all about the monetary worth aspect of it. Again, an early view of that. I think what's also really important here are the gatekeepers. So it doesn't just take the individual to decide to join. Those gatekeepers, whether they're parents or relatives or influencers, just saying, just understand that this whole wrap that goes around you when you join the armed forces is not just about the monies that you receive in your pay packet or in your pay statement every month. There's much more to it than that, and therefore just getting an understanding of that is really important. Now, they don't think and live and breathe it every day, of course they don't, but there's certain points in time where it's really important. I talk about our sort of target audience being serving military and their partners approaching key decision points. And that key decision point could be the 3-year, 4 or 5 year point. That decision point could be the 12-year point, it could be the 15-year point. But or it could be a divorce, and it could be medical discharge. But those are the points in time where anything you've done to prepare will see you much better, further down the line. Don't wait till the moment comes up, smacks you in the face. If you've done a bit of prep, time spent on recce and all that sort of stuff, seldom wasted. And we wish to be part of that continuous journey where through life, people are just having a dip every now and again into their pension, having a look at it, getting an update, and then proceeding with confidence that they know they're doing the right thing.
Sounds like, just as I hear you speak about those roadshows as well, and the way in which you frame this, there's almost a bit of a Martin Lewis effect. Perhaps the culture of his programme and his campaigning and his influence is getting younger people to think differently about financial decisions. So perhaps this is a time now, Martin, if you're listening, you could be a great influencer and ambassador for the Forces Pension Society.
And things like I think I mentioned to you previously before we started recording about the unclaimed pensions aspect. So of those 470,000 pensions that are in payment, people who have earned a pension and that's now being paid to them, 15,000 of those have gone unclaimed. So there's 15,000 armed forces pensions benefits out there that people have come to, they've done service, let's say in the 70s or 80s. It could be 5 years, 10 years, depending on what it might be, and there's different qualifying criteria for different stages of life, and also commissioned, non-commissioned, and then wherever we were in the 80s or the 90s. And come age 60, if they're on the 75 scheme, or age 65 on the 05 scheme, or state pension age on the 15 scheme, they're entitled to a deferred pension. And that deferred pension has to be claimed. So the system will try and identify those people, but if you left in the mid-90s, you'll have moved house 2 or 3 times, whatever it might be, you might not be aware. And let's be honest, the system back then wasn't as good as seeing people out the door in good order. Let's accept that. And people don't know what their entitlements are. And you can ask a veteran who's coming to age 60 or beyond age 60, who did 8, 9, 10 years in the 80s, 90s, if you got your deferred pension, what's that? Never heard of it. Why? You have to fill in Form 8, or you speak to Veterans UK, the Defence Business Services, the pension administrator, and you have to apply for it. And we've got examples where we've managed to join those dots, and people have thought, fantastic, I've now got a £15,000 lump sum and £5,000 a year pension that I didn't know I was entitled to, and other sort of variations on that theme. You can imagine the difference that makes to people who may just be looking at their state pension as their only income source come age 65, or they've got they've had family trouble, whatever it might be. These are really important things. So the government, to be fair, does try and marry people up with their pension entitlements, but the onus is on the individual to do it. So there's a plug for unclaimed pensions, but that's the sort of thing that the Martin Lewis type approach can help publicise these things. And I think he has commented on it before as well, and we try and publicise it through various forums. And we're hosting an event on the 8th of September in Parliament, and we're seeking to raise awareness about that very subject then.
Perhaps get Martin along too. So let's talk about Parliament. You mentioned that, and that's an interface between you as an organisation and government. Now, I'm assuming you've not got a big, clunky government affairs team working for the Force Pension Society. I'm probably looking at the government affairs team, right? Which is kind of handy having a general in the midst. But you work with others as well, other charities, in order to facilitate change. Now, there's this tension. I think I read an article that you'd written where you talk about the difference between campaigning, and you prefer, I think, to use influencing as a term instead. Tell us about how you engage with government to affect change, where the kind of places that you find yourself in, and the types of characters that you engage with.
Well, again, it's a really, so we collaborate a lot with other organisations close to now. So we're as a not-for-profit, we're not a charity, we're a not-for-profit, and that does give us certain freedom. All right, to pursue our agenda and our sort of articles in a manner which is not constrained by being a charity. Which is an important sort of differentiator. And I've said before, we're not a union. Therefore, campaigning is something that people expect. Banners and chaining yourself to the railings of Downing Street or wherever it might be. And there's people who think we should be doing that. I'm not exactly a one-man band when it comes to the influence piece. We have a very good network of other vice presidents and others who are out there who for no monetary gain will ask questions in Parliament. Will sort of support our cause, which is really important. I meet with MPs regularly. I'm on my 20th meeting with MPs this year, just to remind them, and mostly backbenchers at this, for the routine things.
Well, it's all party parliamentary groups, which
Absolutely,
are communities
all party
of MPs.
parliamentary groups, and it's all about just reminding them that the Armed Forces Pension Scheme is there as part of the capability wrap for defence. It's not something you play fast and loose with, and the unintended consequences of fiscal choices. For example, last 2 years there's been a lot of rumour about reducing the lump sum allowance, which caused a lot of concern across the serving military community, and I had to write twice to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury to say you've allowed this rumour to take hold where you could have actually closed it off. And by allowing it to take hold, it has caused uncertainty and concern amongst the serving community. And we know of people who are choosing to leave the armed forces, by a certain date earlier than they normally would have done, or they ordinarily would have done, because of this threat. The clue is in the title: tax-free lump sum. People have served, and that's part of the deal, and that's part of the promise.
So that's your role as almost a critical friend there.
Yeah, absolutely, and a critical friend is a very good example, because we are all taxpayers. We all want to make sure the right things are done, and it's really important that we don't just sort of stand in the sidelines and snipe. We actually say, well, here's the reason why this ought to be there, because it's all about retention, it's all about commitment, and it's that part of the bond with the covenant. So it's really important that you are measured, reasonable, consistent, and not just sort of, dare I say it, mouthing off or firing off random tweets, just being critical about things. We seek to offer reasonable argument for the sustainment of whether it is the status quo, and that might be the case, or if there is change in the air, that change must be cognizant of the four aspects of what the pension must do. Retain, reassure, transition to civilian life, dignified retirement. And so long as it achieves those things, then that's fine by us. We've just got to make sure that we don't enter the realm of unintended consequences. And very often that's about education and raising awareness. And of course, when you're talking to politicians about unclaimed pensions, or the MacLeod remedy, or the Milroy case and that sort of stuff, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a moment, those are things that they don't live and breathe every day. And therefore, just having 30 minutes where their knowledge levels are topped up is really important, and it helps that broader influence and understanding. So when any change does come along, you've got people out there who are sort of temperamentally attuned to the needs of the forces pensions, the armed forces pension scheme. So that's what we are seeking to do, without necessarily being too overt about it. And that takes me into Ministry of Defence a fair bit, as you expect. I'm a member of the MOD Pension Board as an employee's representative. That's some very important work. It's a very, very high priority efforts for me, because I want to make sure that the administration and oversight of the Armed Forces Pension Scheme is done as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And there are challenges in that space, as I'm sure people will recognise. But very often it's a case of just reminding government and MOD that they need to resource these things. I'm a great believer that men and women, good and true, get out of the bed in the morning to do a decent job. Very often they're just not enabled so to do. And if they're not enabled so to do, it is the department's responsibility to provide the resources and the authorities to get them to do that. And very often there are blockages in that system. And I think we've witnessed some of that quite recently.
And you've picking up on a couple of your points about the approach. If you are out there and you've got a highly emotive, often issue, lived experience that you're really frustrated and you want to affect change, we too often, as you've alluded to, see quite vocal, damaging, sometimes personal attacks on individual politicians or the MOD. Some of it is completely vindicated in the source of it.
Yes.
But perhaps the approach needs to be a bit more nuanced. What would your advice be to an individual or even a nascent organisation that wants to engage with government or Westminster to affect change? What are those kind of first steps that you would advise them to take before perhaps hitting send on that tweet?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think people's approaches will be different, and some of it's down to their own individual personality and the nature of the organisation. You see some organisations, some people are more militant than others. And I won't name names and I won't name organisations, but you can see some demands that are being made of governments, not necessarily this government now, but governments over time, by certain organisations that may appear a bit unreasonable. And I think this is all about sensing public sentiment. And the public, yes, they're great supporters of the armed forces, absolutely. But when it comes to making difficult choices, and to govern is to choose, and the choices have to be made. And I think we're seeing that happen right now with debates over welfare, defence investment plans, and all of that. And therefore, it's understanding that, yes, I might have a single issue that I am very, very focused on. And this to me is the most important issue right here, right now. But actually, for the vast majority of the population, it isn't. And it's about how you raise awareness in that space, how you try and understand the other people's perspective. As Robbie Burns would say, to see how others would see us and all that sort of stuff. Understand where others are coming from, and then almost start building yourself to the counter argument. So that when you're put down on something, you actually know that I do have a compelling argument. So we live and breathe this narrative for the Armed Forces Pension Scheme, the 4 phases that I've talked about. We have the pillars for the Armed Forces Pension Scheme, 5 pillars, which is where I talk about the Armed Forces Pension Scheme, the whole purpose of being to sustain operational effective armed forces. And to do that, needs to be formed on 5 pillars: defined benefit, government assured, death and ill health retirement benefits, support transition to civilian life, and technically non-contributory, i.e. a non-contributory pension, but it's still contributory in relation to when the overall pay and remuneration packages are decided, the pension's taken into account. And also people contribute through selfless commitment. So, and therefore it's having, building your narrative, building your elevator pitch, wherever it might be, seeing it from the other perspective. And then I have to say, repeat. So 80th anniversary, I started off this year with 6 key challenges. I won't go into them right now, but you can see I'm one for lining things up. But those are the 6 key challenges for 2026 are the things that I talk about every time I talk to, whether it's a senior official, minister, senior military leaders. I always just tick those off in the back of my mind to make sure they are resonating. And over time, it bubbles up to the surface. And I would hope that when, let's say there's going to be another pension review in X number of years' time. There will be. It's an inevitability. We all know that public sector pensions get reviewed, we've got the triple lock state pension, all that sort of stuff. That when that moment comes, enough people have been educated, or not just educated, but made aware of what those key aspects of the Armed Forces Pension Scheme are. So when the big decisions have to be taken, they go, yeah, this is not something we play fast and loose with. This is the reason for it. And the acme of staff skill is when you hear people quoting that back to you. And when they're quoting that back to you, you go, job done.
Well, some brilliant tips there. I think both for individuals that have their pet projects, peeves, campaigns, and I said some of those are really highly emotive through lived experiences, but actually being measured and the consistency, the repetition of those messages are some great tips there that we can all learn from as someone that's a student of this campaigning space. And you mentioned the Milroy case there. Now, I know this is ongoing and you can't comment too much on the detail because it's all under all sorts of reviews, but briefly explain what the Milroy case is and how that might involve another community engaging with the Forces Pension Society.
So this is very much a reserves issue. So here we are in June, and so about 2 years ago, in August 2024, Major Charles Milroy took the MOD to an employment tribunal, and his case was that the pre-2015, where it was just mobilised service that was applicable for pensions, all service should have been, all reserve service should have been pensionable. Why? Because from 2015 onward, with the introduction of the 2015 scheme, all reserve service is pensionable. People have to still do their 2-year vesting period and accumulate that service to qualify for a pension, but that was the fundamental rub. And the other aspect that he took to the Employment Tribunal was that reserve pay, which was a divisory and still remains a divisory of 365. So take a regular pay and a reservist pay. The reservist pay is a daily rate, divided by, so the annual salary divided by 365 becomes the daily rate for the reservist. Well, actually, that doesn't reflect the number of working days in a year. Let's say that's more like 240, 250, or slightly less, wherever that figure might be. But dividing by 365.25 made that salary lower. And on those counts, the Employment Tribunal found in favour of Charles Milroy. And therefore, it found that under the Part-Time Worker Regulations 2000, that the claimant was indeed a part-time worker and had been treated unfairly under those regulations. Now, that meant, in sort of everyday language, that meant that the Ministry of Defence would need to put a remedy in place. Well, the MOD challenged that. It went to an appeals employment tribunal, and at the end of January this year, that was refused. The MOD then has appealed again to take it to the Court of Session, because this was done in Scotland, therefore it's the Court of Session who will decide. And the leave to appeal is now sat with the Court of Session, and that will be taken on the 8th of October. So we're in a bit of a dwell period now, and so those who think they may have been affected by this case should visit our website, forcespensionsociety.org. On the landing page, there's the Milroy case. It's there permanently. We update it only as regularly as we need to, because it's not a fast-moving case. And if there are people who feel they wish to take some precipitous action, that want to register as being perhaps an aggrieved party, then we lay out for them what they need to do. It's a certain process they need to go through. I won't rehearse it all now, but that's where the information is. So this could be a big issue come the autumn, and also, who knows, the appeal might be allowed to proceed, and then that appeal will then go on for, I would have thought, another several months. So there's various outcomes here, Johnny, none of which are clear, and I'll just say, stay tuned.
And you'll be there, Forces Pension Society.
We will.
Ready. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Before we wrap, what's next? What's next for you? What's next for Forces Pension Society? And what would be, for our listeners and viewers, the call to action for anything they've heard today?
Yeah, well, for me personally, I don't quite know what retirement looks like, Johnny, so therefore I think I'll be soldiering on for a wee while yet. What we do is purposeful. It really matters. I think we're a force for good, and so long as we are seen as that, and the work that we are doing is adding value, and people are learning as well as feeling that they are being represented, then that's great. Technology is evolving all the time, of course it is, AI and all the rest of it. We still provide a distinctly personalised service to our members. So we have a brilliant team of pension consultants who are out there now, engaging with our members, whether by email or by phone, and they're getting that personal touch. So I still believe a distinctly personalised service matters. It probably matters more now than it ever did. In an era where you think you can just go and get something straight off the internet, it's not as straightforward as that, particularly with something as complex as the Armed Forces Pension Scheme. So the provision of a personalised service, balancing that across the technological evolution, absolutely is really important. Helping maintain awareness in a manner that is acceptable to the generation of today, which is really important, but also creating the conditions for the next generation. That to me is always my focus. If there's going to be another review in time, if the MOD are going to look at changing things within the pension scheme, really making sure that we are really up close to this, understand what it is they're seeking to do, give our guidance to them in terms of through the consultation process as to what we think might work and what might not work and where the pitfalls might be. And through all that, representing the interests of our members and the next generation. So I would hope, and as I said at the annual general meeting just last week, I hope that those who founded the society back in 1946 would, 80 years later, if they're looking at us now, say, yeah, they're doing all right, they're doing the right thing. And they are sort of reflecting everything that we sensed was required way back then, because we're only we stand on the shoulders of giants and all that sort of stuff, and we're playing it forward for the next generation. I'm very conscious that all of us are just transitory through these things. The organisation, like the Armed Forces, is bigger than any individuals, and so long as we are continuing to add that value and making the Armed Forces voice heard in relation to pension provision, I think that's something worth carrying on.
Well, happy birthday, Forces Pension Society. Happy 80th birthday. This has been a super informative conversation. I know our listeners, be they civilian or military or just political, will have found out so much more about this very complex landscape. It's added so much value, and we're really, really grateful for your time. And also what we've learned about how veterans like yourself in positions of influence can affect change. And so you might be working for a not-for-profit, you might be working for a charity, a company or a cause. Use those skills that we have demonstrated for your own service and apply those to effect for change, because you can do that in a far more nuanced way. And that's what, that tension between campaigning and influencing. Yes. That's how you can achieve change. And I think you've beautifully and eloquently described that today.
So my final call to action then, Johnny, is on the unclaimed pensions piece. So if there are veterans out there, some of whom will say, it doesn't affect me, but it may affect some of your mates, it may affect folks who don't identify as veterans. Yeah, so the more people we can say, don't forget, there are 15,000 unclaimed Armed Forces Pensions benefits out there. Go to the Forces Pensions website, unclaimed pensions, have a look at it, and then follow through from there. That's something that people can do as a free good.
And we'll make sure we put the link in our show notes. And as Martin Lewis might say, it's your money.
That's right. Nice way to end.
Thank you.
Pleasure.